Hello and welcome to the latest episode of our unmatched Six Nations coverage here on the KLNS Rugby podcast. Tonight, we're going to preview the Guinness Men's Championship as Ireland seek to secure an historic three-peat, but with France, England, and Scotland hot on their heels. Join me tonight. We have regulars in journalists Gavan Casey and Paul Eddison, as well as debutante and analyst and podcaster Sam Larner. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the show. We are a little bit tight for time, so I'm going to skip the pleasantries and the excitement and all that. And I just take it that you're all uber excited for the Six Nations. And we're just going to get straight into Ireland because they are the reigning champions. Gav, I'll start with yourself. I know you've recorded with Bernard Jackman and Murray Kinsella today, and I'm sure many other people in the last couple of weeks. Where do you think Ireland are at as we head into the 2025 championship?
I think they are the fourth best team in the world right now. I think you can be that specific about it. I would say that South Africa deservedly remain top in that particular running order, followed by France, to my mind, followed by New Zealand, as they showed in November against Ireland. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad place to be in that there will be, of course, a weight of expectation on this Irish team, as there has been from the public for many years now. But compared to, say, the Grand Slam year of 2023, I would make the case that Ireland are coming in slightly under the radar. I know it's tough to make that case in the sense that they're back-to-back champions. Everybody is going to be looking to hunt them down, but they're not tournament favourites with the bookmakers. I don't think they're going to be tournament favourites with anybody on this call. They certainly weren't with Bernard or Murray, the aforementioned earlier on today. And I think it's a pretty decent spot for them to be coming into the tournament as maybe like slight underdogs behind France, but with France at home, with England at home to kick things off as well. So I'm probably a little bit more calm about this one than I have been about the last two. And I know you wanted to skip the pleasantries and the excitement levels and all that kind of thing, but I have to say that Six Nations 2 years after World Cup is always my favorite one, because the next World Cup is so far away that it's still kind of an abstract concept, and we don't necessarily need to delve into it too much, or we don't need to look at the Six Nations through the lens of how these teams are going to look at a World Cup. The one immediately after the World Cup is always one where teams are completely in flux, and we saw that with France last year. This to me is like the purest form of Six Nations, because this is where we get to see where these teams are exactly right now, and right now is almost all that matters.
It's also a championship the Wales have done well in, and I know we'll get to Wales at the very end of the show, but 2 years after the World Cup is when they won their last one. They won in 2005, they won in 2013 as well. But look, just on that gap, we will stick to Ireland. We'll go through it team by team in the order of how they finished last year, and I think we could have a few people predicted the same way this year. Squad selection. I did a episode on this. It was divisive at best. It always is. And look, if you want to talk about certain players being omitted, and I could throw out Jude Postlewaite, and obviously Ulster lost to Zebra last night as we record. But with the age profile of the squad, with the injury concerns, Sheehan, Lowe, Furlong ruled out, and so forth, do you think it is a very fair cause for concern for Irish fans?
Fair is an interesting word. Like, to be honest, I thought some of the reaction to the squad was a little bit overblown, and increasingly in the digital media age, that is the case. Of course, you're going to have parochialism in it. Of course, you're going to have, I would say, justifiable arguments about players who missed out on selection. I know you were a big Munster guy, and somebody like Tom Ahern, of course, you would say he's unlucky to miss out. I would make the case, conversely, that as brilliant a player as I believe Tom Ahern to be, in the dying stages of those two games against Saracens and who did Munster play most recently? Sorry, my mind has gone blank.
Northampton.
Northampton, excuse me. Yeah, like Hearn had moments there which would cause slight doubt for an international head coach, just in terms of knocking the ball on late on against Sarries, and then yeah, like let's be honest, like coming out second best in a Saints counter ruck on a couple of occasions in that game at Franklin's Garden. So like, and think about the way that Andy Farrell, well, and I do believe it would have been Andy Farrell making these calls for the most part, even though he's going to be on a line sabbatical. He's going to look at this so much more forensically than the likes of myself. He's seen most of these players up close and personal. He understands what makes them tick, and the way that they contribute to an overall squad. And I find it difficult to really strongly argue against his instincts based on those facts. In terms of the age profile, then, Kaelon, like, I would say that if you're reading the squad on paper and you see a lot of 31s and 32s and 33s, yes, that would be cause for concern, except for the fact that those very players, and I'm thinking of, say, Josh van der Fleer, Bundy Aki, Tyg Byrne, have all come into like really serious veins of form as this championship approaches. Now, Aki has done it, like Aki is effectively South African in his approach to rugby, right? Like when it comes to international tournaments or test windows, he takes things up a notch to become the world class player that he is. And it just so happens like that he has been playing very well for Connacht in recent weeks. But I suppose a lot of those more senior guys are, after maybe some relatively quiet periods in their respective careers, coming back into form that is a little bit more recognizable for them. So I don't know that the age profile of the squad overall is a concern. If you were projecting forward towards World Cup, absolutely it is. But if you're just trying to defend a Six Nations title and do something that's never been done before and going back to back to back, I find it difficult to make too many arguments with the selection that, let's say, Simon Easterby has made.
No, and that's all very fair. I think you could have an hour on it and still, not change your mind no matter what side the coin you are. We've seen this with England, Wales, Scotland, France. France a little bit less so because they literally call up 800 players for any given window, but that's a little bit different. Paul, I'm going to bring you in here because, as Gavin slightly alluded to there, Ireland are the champions. They are the hunted once again for the second year in a row. But after that autumn, where France did so well, England probably should have got over the line at least once or twice more. Ireland a little bit less so, and probably it could have been two wins as easily as it was three. Do you think we've seen a shake-up in the pecking order the last 2 years? Because it was so clearly Ireland and France for 3 years in a row, essentially. Do you think we've seen a slight shake-up in the pecking order?
Yeah, I think to an extent. There was certainly a point during last year's Six Nations where I thought, well, if Ireland go and win at Twickenham, they're going to probably go three slams in a row because looking at the calendar the following year, it just felt that they were quite a distance away ahead of everyone else. Obviously, they didn't win that one. I don't think that changed too much. But then the autumn, suddenly they're not quite as invincible at home, which it really did feel like they were. And so certainly it does feel like, yeah, as you say, England have stepped up a level despite the results in the autumn. Scotland, a couple of unfortunate injuries, but I felt coming into this they were going to be kind of there or thereabouts. And France, I wasn't quite as convinced by them in November as some, but they probably got the best All Black performance and still just about got over the line. So I think there's a fair assumption that they're getting closer. So I think, yeah, there's not the gap that there was going into last year's championship, and there's certainly not a clear top two, which I think there was at least for the last 2 years. We've looked coming into the tournament, even if France didn't actually show it.
Yeah, and I think that's very important as well. And again, one of the many conversations we could have tonight, but we won't be, is TV rights and that breaking news that came out today. But I think last year there was that sense of it's going to be a second or third year in a row where it's a top two and then there's a gap and then there's the rest. I don't know if that's as much the case. We will get on to Scotland later. We will get on to France in less than 5 minutes. Sam, I'm going to bring you in here, and again, thanks for coming on your debut. But probably a slight curveball to throw at you first up because Ireland, they have a new head coach, they have a new-ish attacking coach, albeit with Johnny Sexton in there. We won't get into that just yet, but they do look a little bit stuck. And from your perspective, I know you do a lot of very good analysis and things like this. What do you want to see from Ireland if they're going to burst through this dip in form, where they did go like the raw numbers? They went 5 games, 3 losses at one point of the year last year.
Yeah, so I think from the young analysis side of things, the fact is, as you say, they weren't playing particularly well in the autumn, but they came out with a performance in a result sheet that most of the nations in the Six Nations would take. So I think from that perspective, things weren't working, but as long as you're winning, you've got loads of time to sort that out. If you look at England, there was still talk about Borthwick going, even though there was a clear improvement from England, but they just weren't getting the results. So I think from Ireland's perspective, what I'd like to see is that game plan, when it works, it's incredibly effective. I kind of maybe tie it a little bit to Argentina's game plan, where when they're getting forward ball, it looks so attractive, that kind of edge to edge, finding the little gaps, lots of little offloads from the forwards, really exciting, kind of penetrating rugby. But when it's not working, it just looks turgid and kind of really hard and like they're kind of playing in mud. And watching that opening game against the All Blacks, it was so kind of flat and all those things that were working before weren't working. And it's fairly basic, but I think it just comes down to, well, first of all, can you win your set piece successfully and put pressure on the opposition? And then can you punch holes when you're carrying the ball? And I think the big test will be what England's defense looks like that they face, and can they start to go through them? Because I think if they start to make a couple of carries early on, get the other side of England, maybe they get offload, but then they swing back round and attack those kind of isolated English players. I think we might be on to something where we go, oh, it was just a blip, it was just an autumn blip, and it's all fine. Um, I think if after half an hour or at the break we're looking at that Irish performance and thinking, oh dear, this is hard. It could be a really long Six Nations, I think, and then you start to get the pressure. Which, to be honest, I know obviously Ireland are always under pressure, but I don't think there's been much pressure about coaching changes or anything like that for a long time now. But I think you start to worry whether does that start to come if the result doesn't come against England, and you could imagine against Scotland away as well.
No, I firmly agree, and I think it was I think it was Porrick who we had on after the New Zealand game, and he just looked at the numbers and he's like, Ireland were just passing two or three passes almost per phase. It wasn't exactly two or three passes per phase. It felt like that against New Zealand because they were not winning their collisions. They were not winning off the first pod or off 12 with Bundyaki and so forth. And you can just, it can become a little bit unstuck, I think is the best way of putting it. And that was the same way in Twickenham last year. Now, playing South Africa in South Africa in Pretoria is entirely different, and the numbers will be a little bit skewed at the end of the season. But I do think that's something that we will be looking out for this week. And I know one of the people we'll have on to preview the England game is going to look at the line out and how important that is, as Paul and Gav alluded to as well. But it is a weird position for Ireland, I think, because as I said, it felt like the last 3 years were guaranteed top two. It's just which one. Now it's like England, France, Scotland, they're all more than capable, and it's good. It's good for the tournament. And we're going to move on to
Could,
France. Go
could
on,
I?
Gav. I'll get you get in there first.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin. Before we move on to France, like, because you made a good point about the cold hard facts of results, and at a certain point, if you were just reading them in a row, it was 3 defeats in five. And like, I think I've said for a while, I think the best of this Ireland team is behind them. It doesn't mean that they're not a good team now, but I just think we saw the best of them in 2023 in their current iteration. And if you look at, say, some of their results, even that year, but particularly during the 2024 Six Nations, like, a lot of those performances were performances that Ireland wouldn't have been especially pleased by. We all have in the backs of our minds these like crazy, um, I suppose, like attractive looking, aesthetically pleasing sorts of performances. You think of the 23 game against France, the third test in New Zealand, etc. And you sort of think of that of those games as Ireland being at the peak of their powers. There was a time where they didn't need to be at the peak of their powers, but they would just eke out a victory. And they effectively won a Grand Slam by doing that in 2023. In 2024, they weren't at their best at Twickenham, and they came unstuck, as you said. It kind of in a similar way, I would say, to what happened against New Zealand more recently. The first test in South Africa, that was a pretty bad Irish performance, and certainly Andy Farrell, by all accounts, let them know as much afterwards. So, like, it's no longer the case, I would say, that Ireland can kind of get away with an average kind of performance and just eke out a result, because they're just not quite as good a team. And that makes it a far more open championship, but it equally puts a massive emphasis on performance this weekend. It can't just be about getting one over in England. I think they have to, ultimately, it is about the result, but they have to look good in getting a result as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one game you probably missed there in that is Marseille last year in the opener. No one knew where Ireland were at. They were phenomenal for 80 minutes in that one. Yes, France had a red card, but like, it was a double score win. Do you know what I mean? That just doesn't
Yeah.
happen over in France, and that's one that we get into. We'll get into France now. And Paula, I'm just going to kick things off with a stat for you because Russ Petty, who we all know, he is fantastic at every little bit of this. Six Nations in odd years. France have won the title in 5 of 13 even years, 1 out of 12 in odd years. The championship, the Six Nations home advantage is so important, and France last champions in, of course, 2022 in an even year. They don't tend to do well these years, but it would be remiss of us not to start the conversation by looking at Bordeaux and Toulouse and La Rochelle and so forth and how good they've been. And you just go back and you think maybe 2025 will be that year.
Maybe. They've certainly got the players for it and the guys who are in form. I think it's a fair point about France in odd years go to Dublin and Twickenham, which are notoriously two of the trickier ones. Although we'll go back to '05 when they didn't win it, and Sam, I'm sure, will remember that the only game they lost was at home to Wales, which was one that they will probably want back. But yeah, I think it's the reason why I don't think they should. I think people are maybe overselling them as favourites. Talent-wise, sure, but those are two very tricky games, and I'm not convinced that they'll win them both. Um, and there are a couple of little flaws in there in terms of there are a couple of injuries in the wrong place. Toulouse and Bordeaux, obviously, yeah, as you say, absolutely flying. And backline wise, even with a couple of injuries, it feels like they've got a load of guys who can score points whenever you want. But the pack has taken a little bit of a hit, and that might be the bit of a concern. Kind of certainly in the set piece, I'm a little concerned about the scrum that had a couple of moments in the autumn, which was a problem. And while I do quite generally like the loose head stocks, pretty much everyone's either injured or coming back from injury. So it's a test of kind of where they are and how quickly they can get back up to speed.
Absolutely. And look, we have to focus on, I'm not going to say the negatives, but there is pressure because I think if any team is under pressure more than the rest, it is probably France because of the reasons that we stated. And there is a certain Antoine Dupont who's coming back into the fray this year. And there's an element with Dupont where you want to mention him as little as possible, but you have to mention him about 10 times because he is that important. But given his stature, given Fabien Galtier's approach to all things France, I think it's fair to say. Do you think there's a bit of pressure in France to deliver success? Maybe not even this year, but especially over the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think there's certainly been comments about the Six Nations results. I mean, they've been top two every year with Galtier in charge, but they've only won it once. This will be the sixth one. That's starting to be a decent amount. You'll certainly look back in 2020, they lost it because of a bonus point given away at the end of the England game. 21 arguably could have won that, ended up kind of losing at Twickenham in the last minute, losing against Scotland at the last minute. 23 fine, 24 was a bit of a write-off because of no Dupont, and obviously post World Cup, they obviously really struggle with that. So you can kind of explain them all out, but it is one in five, which is not a great return when you think how good a team they've been. And now the Dupont's back, I think there is certainly some pressure. There have been some comments from the players themselves, from some of the club coaches. Hugo Muller has certainly said that it's probably not as good a return as you would want for this generation of players. They've basically barely lost with the first team outside the Six Nations. I mean, literally once against South Africa, and that's it. But in the Six Nations, they've had a couple of defeats at the wrong time. So that's kind of the there is a sense that if they don't perform, questions might start to be asked of the coaching team. Obviously, there was a bit of an overhaul post World Cup with a few new assistants, and there'll be some questions about whether it's quite working. But yeah, they showed enough in November to think there's growth, but there is also, as you say, some pressure on them to certainly be right in the mix and hopefully to actually bring back some silverware at last.
And just to bookend that part of the conversation on, the away games and going to Twickenham, you have to go back as far as 1983, the last time France won consecutive championship games in Twickenham. It just doesn't really happen. I don't have the one for Dublin in front of me. It took me long enough to find the answer for that one. But it is like you cannot talk about the Guinness Six Nations and not talk about the importance of home advantage. Even if it's, Wales against Italy this year, which a lot of people tip as the wooden spoon match. Unfortunately, it's such a big factor. And Sam, like first and foremost, how do you see France going? Because as Paul alludes to, they have the ability, the talent, the coaching, they have everything. But again, it's too tough away trips, and personally, I can see them winning in Dublin. I just don't see them winning both, is the only thing.
Yeah, I personally would put them as marginal favourites for the tournament. Um, and this is not to rake up the whole "you never know which France you're going to get" trope, because I don't think that's not been true for a long time. But what I do think is they're perhaps a team that have more the ability to lose games they shouldn't be losing. Like I think back to Ireland, and yeah, you can see them losing those games against equally or slightly lower matched opposition. but you couldn't really imagine that they would lose to Scotland, for example, or not unless something kind of drastic happened. Um, I would agree as well that as much as I think this French team has been amazing for rugby as a whole. For them personally, I wonder how successful they've really been. I remind you of this, like my NFL and the Baltimore Ravens, for example. Everyone looks at them as like they're so beautiful to watch and such amazing, players and really exciting. But for all of that greatness, they haven't actually produced any real meaningful results. Which isn't obviously France aren't as far gone as that, but I do think there's a concern. I think they really do need to start just that kind of cold-blooded, kind of mechanical, just winging stuff consistently, rather than those cold November nights, in Paris or Marseille, where they produce the best rugby we've ever seen to beat New Zealand. Um, but I think the thing that makes the Six Nations so wonderful is that Wales and Italy aside, every other game it's not quite a coin toss, but I don't think there's any of those games where anyone is more than 55% favourite to win. And then if you add home field advantage in that, which is probably about 55%, you basically wipe out that advantage if the weaker side's playing at home. So I think that I can see them beating both sides. I could see the Twickenham game being a slightly easier affair. However, as you say, it's just so unlikely that anyone wins all six games, all five games even. But obviously, it happens. I guess it's like the lottery, really, in that it's so unlikely that it happens, but somehow it does every year. But yeah, I think they'll struggle to win both games, but I do think it'll be a non-Grand Slam victory from overall.
Yeah. I will be getting full predictions later, but I would be of a similar opinion, not to spoil it. But you mentioned, like it's every game is going to be so close. And you look at round two, for instance, I think Irish eyes are so focused on round one and England at home because it's England, it's the old enemy, whatever else. Scotland away from home is not easy. Like if we see the Scotland that played against Australia in the autumn, that's a very tricky fixture for Ireland, especially considering how they got on against Australia. And to nice segue, that is the team we're going to move on to next because Scotland are the team who forever are under the radar. This might be their year. Might have vanished since the injury to Sione Tuipulotu is the only thing. And Sam, you're as are one of the neutrals. You were targeted on taking on Scotland for this show. They're exciting. They're unpredictable. But the big question, can they finally break down their own glass ceiling in 2025?
I don't think that they will. I think they may take a step backwards. I think one of the things with Scotland that maybe gets missed because the star players are Finn Russell, Darcy Graham, Van der Merwe, these guys who are exciting, they're kind of highlight reel players. Um, because they're there, I think often they get lumped as that's the kind of team they are. They're attack from anywhere. They're play with the ball. They're do whatever. Kind of really exciting. But actually, the reason why they're so good is because of that incredibly stout defense. And if you look at the last three games they play against Ireland, I think it's 7, 13, and 14 points they've scored. Lost all three of them, and they haven't got over 15 points once. If you think back to the 2023 World Cup, obviously that was an incredibly tough draw. But against both Ireland and South Africa, they didn't really fire the shot in attack in either of those games. Um, so what they need is that stout defense to keep them in it. And I think if they get into it for the first hour, I think they're really dangerous. And we've seen that with some of their recent performances, especially against weaker teams where they're able to just kind of blast through and just stay for longer. But the concern there, as you mentioned, is Tuipulotu not there. And he was the balance between the incredibly stout, potentially Six Nations winning defence and their flair attack. And with him gone, although I think there are people who can replace him uh, in that do some of what he does, I don't think there's anyone, and I would perhaps go as far to say I don't think there's anyone in the Six Nations who could come in and do exactly the role that he does. I think he's the most the single most important player for any of the Six Nations teams. And so, of course, with him gone, I think it hurts them much more than it would for any of the other teams.
No, look, Gav mentioned earlier, I'm a Munster fan. I am not going to be shy away from that. But the performance, the last time I seen Sione Tuipulotu play in front of me was in Thomond Park in the Euro season final, and he was unstoppable. And when he gets into that groove, he is unstoppable. The flip side is, and this is something Gregor Townsend mentioned on the BBC pod today, the last time that Stafford McDowell played a Six Nations game, he was one of the best players on the pitch. And he is likely to be the number 12 to stand in. So it's really interesting to see what way they go. But as well as that, Sam, we all say, the Flair, the Kinghorns, the Van der Merves, the Darcy Grahams, Sione and Hugh Jones, of course. Probably the big concern is their pack and the power game. Now, they're without Scott Cummings. Johnny Gray is an injured out as well. We can't move past those. And hooker and set piece has been a little bit of an issue in the last 12 months. But there's just that element that I don't think any Scotland fan can look past, that if Italy up first, if they can overcome Ireland in round two, then it's on. It really doesn't matter about any of those things. If they can beat Ireland, it's on.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think it was interesting when I was looking at the fixtures. I was thinking, Ireland are in the perhaps luxury position. I'm not sure how much of a luxury it really is, but they play Italy last. So obviously, if they're in a position where they need to win that to win the tournament, there's always going to be conversations about, oh, maybe Italy could upset them. But I think that would be very unlikely for that to happen in that situation. I don't think it's that unlikely that Italy will beat Scotland in the first round. I don't think they're favourites, but I would not be particularly shocked if that happens. And I just think that Scotland to jump from round to round to round, successfully piecing it all together, I just think it's a bridge too far for this particular team at this time. And I do think if we look back at recent Six Nations, there have been moments of brilliance, and they're a much better side than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But there are moments in Six Nations where they are absolutely exceptional, and there are moments where you think, oh, they've done everything they can, and this is the last game, and they can't get up for it, and they just can't deliver. And I think that there's too many stout defenses that will give them too tough of a test. They won't be able to break them all down, and so I mean, yeah, I could see them finishing. Oh, maybe I won't say well. I think see them finish. I don't want to spoil the end, but I could see them having a tough time of it, and perhaps not being in the top two.
And to be fair, I'd actually forgotten it myself, but the last time Italy went to Murrayfield in 2023 Six Nations, if not for a last minute try, Italy could have swung that. Like, literally, Scotland scored an 80-meter try to win the game after Italy had been on the attack for about 5 minutes beforehand. It's easy to forget these things because and we all watch a lot of rugby. Everyone on this call watches a lot of rugby. It's easy to forget. Paul, if you were to call it, how will Scotland Six Nations go? Because I want to bear in mind the fact that Scotland have been a pretty tough matchup for France from that perspective, but as well at the same time, myself and Gavin in particular will watch a lot more URC in particular. So, from your perspective, how do you think it'll go?
Yeah, I think prior to those two big injuries of Tuipulotu and Cummings, I was thinking maybe this is the year where they can be kind of right in the mix come the final game. I kind of need to see them beat Ireland before I'll ever go into a Scotland Ireland game thinking that it's going to finish anything other than the way it has for the last feels like decade. Particularly the last one at Murrayfield, when kind of everything that they wanted to go right for them did in terms of Ireland being hindered, and then they somehow still managed to not think at all to kind of challenge Van der Fleer in the line out, or I don't know, it just felt like that was such a missed opportunity. So I'm not holding out a huge amount of hope. I think it's also on a Sunday, which I think just takes a little bit of the atmosphere out, maybe makes it slightly less hostile as a place to go. And then suddenly that means you might be going to Twickenham having lost a game, and I know they've got an incredible record against England recently, and talent-wise they're certainly up there with them, if not better. But they've been a lot of close games, and I think maybe one of them finally goes the other way, which I know is probably a bit unfair given I've just said that I assume Ireland will beat them, even though they've been lots of tight games as well. So at that point, I'm thinking maybe it's 2 wins rather than more, and because And maybe they go to Paris, but I'm not convinced. Depending on how France's tournament has gone, I still think that's a tricky one. And so then you're looking at the bottom half of the table, which maybe they'll prove me wrong. Glasgow obviously have been fantastic, although the most recent game I watched of them was against Quins when they were terrible, having just lost to Tuipulotu, and
Yeah.
Stafford McDowell, who is obviously a good player, was part of a midfield that seemed to be lacking in ideas, which wasn't ideal. Granted, no, not Finn Russell, so it's a different midfield. But yeah, I'm not sold yet. And even if they beat Italy quite handily, which I think they probably will, I'll wait until the end of round two before I kind of change my mind on them.
No, I think that's fair, and I think Scotland are the new France in some ways. It's not a case of we don't know which Scotland will turn up. It's just you don't know whether you're going to be uber impressed or uber disappointed in Scotland. And I think that's what the autumn was. The Australia game blew everyone's socks off, but you had to take in the context that they did not fire a shot against South Africa. And that's kind of what we seen last year. And even the fact that the win over England was one of just what, three wins over tier one nations last year, and one of those was Wales. Do you know, if you count Wales? So and I don't mean to be disparaging of them because we will get on to them later, but that's what we're talking about with Scotland. There is, go and prove it. And I would be exact same belief as you, Paul. Until I see them beat Ireland, I'm not sure if they can, because it just feels like a mental block at this stage. Before we move on, and we still have three more teams and predictions and bold predictions to get into, but before we move on, if you do like what you see here, please do subscribe. We will have unrivaled coverage of the men's senior and under 20 championships as well as the women's championships across the next 12 weeks, give or take, I think. But as well as that, if you need a preview of the under 20 tournament, that will be beneath your feed on. For this one, we looked at Ireland in depth, we looked at England and Wales on that as well, ahead of Ireland and England's brilliant opener on Thursday night. And speaking of England, we're going to move on to the next. They come into 2025 with further coaching upheaval. And Paul, with that in mind, there's only one thing you can ask at this stage, really, and it kind of does it feel like England are just restarting again?
Um, well, certainly from a coaching perspective and a defensive perspective, there's been a lot of chat about getting rid of the blitz, although it's not the blitz. No one calls it the blitz, but it is the blitz. But yeah, they're definitely changing their defensive approach. I think which is a bit of a shame because I thought it seemed to be working towards the end of the Six Nations last year and in New Zealand. But I think since Felix Jones has departed, they obviously felt that they didn't have the right people in place to kind of manage that. So they're going to tweak it. Joel Abda's arrived. He, I think, will not be given as much kind of grace as some coaches just because of where he's come from. I mean, he was coaching in Pro D2 with Oyonnax, whose defense wasn't particularly well that successful. I think they were kind of middle of the pack. They seem to have turned the corner recently, so maybe he's turned it around and he'll take that to England. But I don't know. I get the impression that that's going to be a change. And you look through that coaching staff now, and there's pretty much no one who has any experience at international level other than Borthwick. It's a lot of people who have been brought in. And when you had Aled Walters, when you had Felix Jones, they kind of carried that. And now it's thinking, okay, there's a little bit of an unknown there. In terms of what they showed last year, I know the results weren't great at the end, but they certainly could have beaten New Zealand, could have beaten Australia. South Africa, they're a bit further off, but they weren't miles off. I think they were unfortunate to kind of come away with one win from the autumn. So I think there is easily potential for them to challenge. There seems to be a bit of confidence that they might go and get something in Dublin. I've certainly heard a few people kind of, whether it's fans, media, not that far from the team, people thinking there's a decent shot. So I think they're not lacking in confidence, but yeah, we probably need to see a few young faces come in and really step up, whether we see an Opoku Fadraw get into a 23 and start to make an immediate impression. I know Henry Pollock's dropping back down to the 20s, at least for this one, but whether we see him at some point during the championship, I wouldn't be shocked. And then there's obviously the big question about how you manage 10 and 15, which looks like it's going to be Marcus Smith and Freddie Stewart to start, but it puts a lot of responsibility on Marcus Smith as the kind of the real playmaker when you have Stewart. So whether that will change how they attack slightly, I don't know.
That's the thing. There is a lot of so many question marks about England's coaching setup because there has been so much change, and obviously Kevin Sinfield changed roles, and Felix Jones is gone, and Alan Walters is gone, and so forth. But also about on the field, I don't think that's too controversial to say. We'll get on to kind of their club form in a minute, but just kind of on that, like a big factor for England is just kind of like Scotland, proving they can get over the line. They lost narrowly to New Zealand 3 times, lost narrowly to Australia. Granted, some of those games were thrillers. It's likewise the French game, a little bit wider of a margin, but they were in that for long periods. Bar the Ireland game in Twickenham, they just haven't proven that they can do it. And I suppose, how much would you read into that, Paul? Like the fact that they just kind of lost from the point of victory a few too many times.
Yeah, I think you could, when it was in France, you think, okay, fine, it's a late penalty you've given away, that happens. Two in New Zealand, again, you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. And then the All Blacks at home, I'm not really sure how they got to a point where they were 10 points clear, because it didn't really feel like the game had swung that much. But then to let that slip, and then suddenly you think, okay, this is a problem. Australia again, you've let the game get away from you somehow. It's those swings of momentum where you can have 10, 15 minutes and it's 14 points gone, and suddenly what looks like a comfortable position is not. And again, they obviously got back in front in that one and then threw it away again. They obviously looked at a change of captaincy to see whether that will make a difference, having the captain for the full 80 minutes in Itoje, but then Itoje was the captain for the last 20 minutes of all of those defeats, which is, I guess, the slight contradiction in what they're doing. But yeah, I think it is a test of probably who they've got coming off the bench, whether that's the halfbacks, whether that's a reliance on the coaches to be running the show. I mean, it does seem strange because George Ford has come off the bench in a lot of those, and he's probably about as the ideal person you'd want in that situation, isn't it? In terms of experience, game manager, basically a coach on the field. And I don't think you can put all the blame on him, but it feels like the ingredients should be there for them to be better in late games, and they haven't been. I know, like every team, they're obviously working very hard on kind of those late game scenarios, and maybe they'll have hit on one which will come up in Dublin this weekend. But yeah, it may be a bit like Scotland against Ireland. You kind of need to see them do it before you start to believe that they are going to win those late game kind of tight scoreboards.
Definitely. And I think the fact you brought up George Ford, for instance, I think is really good because the form we've seen from Finn Smith recently, especially in Europe, and I'll get onto in a second, Irish viewers will just look at Europe as a measuring stick. They won't look at the Premiership. And I think that is fair. In this day and age, I think that's very fair. But like England often moved Marcus Smith back to fullback, and I would never blame one player for a defeat. But Marcus Smith was not in the right position against Australia when that try was scored because he's not used to playing fullback. Like it's kind of a case of, you know, make your bed and lay in it. Like England can't have it every way that, oh, we've no Fairbanks, we need to put in Stewart, but we need Smith to go back to fullback, and so on and so forth. So it is a big one. And Gav, like on the likes of Finn Smith, and I know he's not available, Henry Pollock and other players, they've been very good in Europe. But for the most part, you look at Saracens, you look at Bristol, Bath, massively underachieved in Europe this year. Irish fans and Irish listeners are going to be tuned in and come like, why would we fear England? And like, we said the same thing in 2019. I will say that. We said the exact same thing then. But they do have a point, don't they?
Well, I don't think you can fear a team who have had the list of results that England have had in the last year or so. And equally, as Paul and yourself have just outlined, the fact that for them in a lot of these close games, losing has become a habit, which is like literally the worst habit to have. Now, it can equally be broken, but we just haven't seen that yet. Who knows if they can go to Dublin and break it? Like, to me, the European form of the clubs, the Premiership clubs, I would personally almost discount that. I know there are cases against what I'm about to say, like David Walsh had a piece in the Sunday Times where he sort of spoke of his concerns for England's defence, in particular with the sort of vacuum left by Felix Jones, the potential dilution or just transition in ideologies there and approaches to it, and the fact that virtually every Premiership defence at the moment seems very porous because the league is such an excellent entertainment product. But to me, where England differ from Ireland and France is that I wouldn't say that there's disproportionate influence of one club on that team. If you look at some of the top teams in the Premiership, the number of England players in that squad are fairly evenly balanced. So, like, England to me are probably almost what a national team is designed to be, in that it's the best of the country, and it's relatively evenly spread among the top probably 5, 6 clubs and across the league in general. So, like, I don't know that you can point to Bath's underachievements in Europe, or Sarri's not being the force they were, or Leicester conceding 80 points in Toulouse, for example, as evidence that England are going to struggle this year, because I think that when that group of English players come together, you still have an excellent 23 there. Mike, I don't have any more to sort of say about England's chances in the competition because of the questions that Paul brilliantly outlined there. It's almost as though you need to see them against Ireland firstly to have any understanding of what they might do in this tournament, and it feels a bit like a bit of a cop-out to make predictions after that. But I kind of think that's where you are with it, because say, going back to the Twickenham game, was it George Fairbank started 15 that day over Freddie Stewart, possibly? Certainly around that time, like, Stewart was out of favour, and it kind of felt like his style of play was a little bit too reductive. Brilliant fielder of a ball, serious boot on him, etc. Like a good, solid fullback, but maybe more of the vein of like a fullback of old. And like, Garvin Dempsey was a fine player. Freddie Stewart's probably a little bit better of a player, but that kind of a mold, I suppose. And now you're going back to that. You know what I mean? So it kind of feels like there's been a little bit of their trying to discover exactly who they are, how they want to play. And obviously you have to take this game by game as well, and have opponent-specific approaches. For example, I would say that Freddie Stewart should absolutely start against Ireland. I think he could have a field day against Ireland. And I was surprised that they didn't go that way last year, but it actually worked when they didn't as well. So it's just that I kind of don't have enough of like a sample size of what England are going to look like going into this game to have any idea as to how it's going to go. And from that point of view, I'm kind of excited to see them, because I think from an Irish perspective, you're going to be looking at November, right? Like their most recent body of work in trying to create a game plan. And I really don't know if England are going to resemble that team from November. Like their defence, for example, could be completely different by now. So, yeah. But to answer your question about the clubs, I probably discount that personally. Now, there's equally a case to be made to not. But I'd be curious what you think of it, Caelan. Do you think it's an actual factor?
I think it has to be a factor to a degree, insofar as we can't say losing is a habit and then lose to the same players and not say it's a habit, especially for, say, granted, Bath aren't the most England heavy team of the Premiership sides, but the manner that they lost in Dublin the last day will really disappoint the likes of Ollie Lawrence. Just to use him as an example. But at the same time, as you said, we don't know what England there is, and I cannot shake it out of my mind, and I don't think the result will necessarily go this way. England are so similar to where they were in 2019, where we had absolutely no idea. We knew what, say, Ireland were or what Wales were that year. We had no idea what England were until they came out the gate, and you're like, yeah, they're World Cup contenders. Now, obviously, it's not a World Cup year this year, but they could do that. Or very similarly, they could be like Wales of 2023, where everyone gave them the hype and thought they are going to kick on, but they also mightn't. And I think England are probably the most fascinating team to watch in this tournament. Granted, the rugby mightn't be the best. That's been a common trend. And on Freddie Stewart, and again, something we will talk about over the course of the championship, him coming back in is going to massively favour England for the kicking game. And obviously the kicking laws have changed so much. He is a big man to have back there. Don't have the numbers. He's probably the biggest of the fullbacks that will be selected. He's definitely bigger than Keenan. He's probably bigger than Ramos as well, and so on.
I think he's
Definitely.
6'4" or something, is he?
Yeah, like he's definitely bigger than Capuzzo. That's the one I can be certain on. And I think that's a factor as well. If England go kick heavy, maybe they're more likely to win. But maybe it's the constant chopping and changing. Itoje as captain, Smith to 15, Fairbank come back in, and so on. Maybe that's what derails them. But I do want to get to Italy and Wales before we finish. And Gav, I know you have a soft spot for Benetton and for Italian rugby. We all do, in fairness, but I know you do as well. They had an excellent 2024 Six Nations. They won 2 games, which may not sound like a lot if you're an armchair fan, but like the manner of how they bet Scotland last year was incredible. Less decent in the autumn. Do you think, though, after the 18 months or so that we've seen, where it's been so up and down, that we just go off the most recent thing and Benetton just beat La Rochelle, and maybe we just take a little bit of confidence off that?
And this is an example of a team who is disproportionately influenced by one club team. So that's where I think it would be absolutely a fair assessment. And you're beating a team in La Rochelle who we've probably compared to a test level team in recent years, whether or not you feel as though they're at the peak of their powers, and certainly they're missing a couple of players in their own right, blah, blah, blah. Like, they lost that game and they deserved to lose it. And it was an unbelievable victory for Benetton. I would say, like, with Italy, going back to the last three Six Nations, it sort of followed a funny trajectory because I had really high hopes for Gonzalo Quesada. I really liked the cut of his jib. I like how he describes the game. I liked how he sees the game, at least in the evidence that I have seen of how he feels a team and approaches the game. And then they came so close to upsetting England in that first game. Well, so close on the scoreline in the end. They were certainly competitive for the vast majority of that game. Then they went to Dublin. Ireland gave them a bit of a hockeying and duck egged them, right? It was like 36-0, something along those lines. And you're kind of thinking, God, same old Italy. They went the rest of the championship unbeaten, like they drew with France as well as those two victories. And it was their best ever Six Nations. And they looked like a legitimately good team by the end of that competition. And I know, like, we'll touch upon November, but even then, to further burnish the point you're making about their inconsistency, I suppose their very next game was their first summer test, and they lost to Samoa, who were in absolute rag order on and off the field for various reasons. So, like, that sort of shows you, I suppose, that Italy still have a little bit of that in them. I know some of that just comes down to, like, not quite having the depth, right, that other tier one countries do. But, like, the rest of that summer was okay, and even November came on. I know it finishes in what was it, like a 40-odd point defeat to Argentina in the end in Udine. But, like, the victory over Georgia, as much as there's only a 3-point victory, Georgia have actually come back again to something resembling their pre-World Cup best, I would say. So, like, it's not really a victory that Italy can sniff at yet. And they put in a pretty decent showing as well at home to New Zealand, by Italy standards, right? If you were to use the World Cup pool game as a contrast, or as the absolute nadir of Italian rugby, then a 29-11 defeat is probably conceivably seen as a step forward. And going into this tournament again, I look at, like the Benetton guys that you're talking about. Is there a better midfield in the championship right now than Tommaso Menicello and Nacho Brex? I'm not sure. Like, they definitely run every other midfield close at the very least. We've probably been saying that for a year now as well. Like, I think we went in with similar expectations of them last year, but it's another year of them being a fully fledged combination. If Paolo
Menicello was Player of the Year last year, probably important to note there.
100%, and you have Paolo Garbisi, who has been on our radars for a long time, is a superb at half, but, like, is playing proper top level ball now with Toulon. Like, it is impressing anytime I've seen him, certainly. Still only 24, and it's funny when we have so many discussions within Irish rugby about our young out halves, Jack Crowley having recently turned 25, Sam Prendergast being still roughly 11 years of age. But, like, Garbisi's in that conversation, right? Like, he's experienced for his age, but still has so much scope to improve. I look at their backline in particular and I think, like, that team again should pose problems and ask serious questions of every team in the competition, and I'd include Ireland in that, and particularly with the fact that they will have to go to Rome. So, like, it's tough to, I know we'll be getting into, like, table predictions and all of that, but maybe it would have been like a cliche last year to say, yeah, I'm not sure any team would be, like, overwhelmingly confident against Italy, or it's not a game you can take as a given anymore. Well, we have championship evidence now of that being the case. And I think if Quesada has them at a point where they're able to peak come Six Nations time, again, it's almost like forgetting about November, forgetting about the summer, and just going again. It is roughly the same squad, and yeah, are they good enough to beat Scotland away from home? I'm not sure, but it would be one of those where it's like, if they do it, it would be wrong to be stunned by it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, like, I was going to ask you about the aim, but I think you've covered it all there very succinctly. I think the weird thing is, Italy could win less games this year, and we could be more impressed by them. Like, you look at their fixtures, if they run Scotland close away from home, which they've done before, we mentioned it 2 years ago, they have Wales at home. That is probably the pressure game, the one that they're going to be expected to win. They have France at home, a game they typically rise for. We've seen it year on year. France come to Rome and they get kind of rattled a small bit because it's one of the last great atmospheres left in the Six Nations, and another conversation we could have another day. Then they're away to England. They will lose that game by 50 points. It's just what happens. Even if it's 7 penalty tries from line-out moments, it's just always what happens. And then they're at home to Ireland, who, again, recent years, their form at home to Ireland has got better year on year on year, especially last time around where Ireland got a bonus point, but that was probably their worst performance of the Grand Slam winning year. It's again like, and I hate to tie all the teams together. I think there's a fascinating element about all these teams. And maybe, and I hate to do this, maybe if there's one team that's less fascinating than the rest, it's the last team we're going to cover, and it's Wales. Because the shine has come off Warren Gatland. They're coming off their worst year ever. And look, we can all slag a team for a year or for 6 months or whatever. And that's the nature of tribalism in sport. But my big theory is for sport to be fun, you need a team to have a down year, not five of them, and that's the other side of it. And Sam, like when it comes to Wales, and yeah, maybe they are in free fall, we don't know. Where do you think they are on this particular litmus test? Because playing Australia, playing South Africa, like Hugh Griffin, friend of the pod, mentioned at the weekend, there was almost a sense of triumphantism after they played South Africa the last time because it was like, well, we didn't ship 70, and like it's very hard to know where they are, but it's very hard to know what constitutes as a good year. We'll get on to that in a second.
Yeah, I think uh, it's not quite rock bottom, but it's pretty close. I thought the reaction to the South Africa game was perhaps more dispiriting than the game itself. I just don't think you can ever, as a Welsh fan or as involved in Welsh rugby or whatever, I don't think you can watch a game like that and say it's anything other than awful. Like I just don't think it's. I, I slightly bristle at, teams losing by 40 points, but maybe they should have lost by 60 or they could have lost by 70, and that being seen as a success. I think there's certain elements in the game where, did you play well? Did you take your lineouts well? Did you kick well? Did you play to the plan that you clearly had in mind? If you did all that and you lose by 50 points because the opposition are great, then, fine. But if you're kind of just hanging on in there because, and the opposition's, frankly, lost interest, I don't think you should walk away from that game thinking it was just anything other than dreadful. And yeah, I mean, I have very little hope that Wales will win a single game this tournament. Um, I think that so I was there in the autumn for the Australia game. And I was actually quite hopeful because the first half an hour of the Fiji game, I thought, okay, this is Wales. They found something. They've got some attack. It's clear what they're trying to do. It's not quite coming off, but it's clear that there's some forward movement. We've moved on from the kind of the dire days of that kind of Welsh attack where you had no clue what it was going to do. It was just, kind of turgid. And now we have something. And Thomas Williams is pulling the strings and Gallifranc comes there and he's doing a great job. And then even when Wales lose against Fiji, I thought, well, yeah, it's not there yet, but there's clear momentum. And then that Australia game hits, and it was so disappointing because so much of that game was just watching a team go left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. At no point make any forward momentum, turn the ball over, and then Australia just picked Wales apart. So I think the thing is, those autumn internationals will show all the opposition in the Six Nations how to play against Wales. And all you have to do is give them the ball and don't make massive errors defensively. Because I don't reckon, I mean, you saw that so often in the autumn. You can let them kick 10 yards from your own line and you're not in that much danger. And so I do think it's going to be a long Six Nations. I don't think they'll win a game.
The flip side of that then is, and it's I don't know if you did it by design or otherwise. Gareth Anscombe's not in the squad. Thomas Williams not in the squad. I was expecting to say Cam Winnett or Max Llewellyn by the end of that list. But the flip side is, what is a good year for Wales? Because I had this discussion with the aforementioned Hugh Griffin at the weekend. Like 2023 was okay. We're getting the band back together. We're just gonna this year. It's about the World Cup. Let's get out of the pool. Let's not embarrass ourselves like we did in '07. 2024 was right. We're going young. Rio Dyer, Cam Winnett, Mackenzie Martin, so on and so forth. Now we're into 2025, and it's kind of like a halfway house. So it actually feels like the flip to Italy, where Italy could win one and you could be impressed. Wales could win two games and we still mightn't know where they stand. So what is a good year for Wales?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting as well what you say about Thomas Williams and Gareth Hanscom because if you pick through that Welsh squad, I think Scotland you've got a little bit of this as well because perhaps the depth isn't there in that you can pick like someone who you might assume to be a squad player and you'll have a look at them and you'll think this guy has played almost no rugby at all. So Ellis Mee is a very good player. Like I think he's been the signing of the season for the Scarlets. I think he's been fantastic in the URC. He's played 9 games. The rest of that he was last year he was at Nottingham. Year before that he was at Loughborough. Yeah, and this is absolutely no disrespect to him because he's there on merit and he's one of the best wingers that Wales have at their disposal at the moment. But there is absolutely no idea whether he's going to be able to perform at this level because we just haven't seen enough of him anywhere else. Whereas if you look at someone like Theo Atiosogbe, who, 20, plays for Po, standout for France recently. I'm pretty sure when he made his debut for France, he played something like 40 games for Po at 20. And by that point, you don't know if he's going to take to international rugby particularly well, but you've got a much better understanding. You know where this floor is. You don't know where the ceiling is, but you know he's not going to go there and just be cannon fodder and be out of the team within a week. So many of these Welsh guys, they might be amazing. You saw it with Cam Wingett. He was brilliant when he came on, when he started his Welsh career, and then a little bit later, he had a bit of a disappointing autumn, and now he's out of the squad. He'll be back in at some point, but players like that, they're learning how to play not international rugby, just rugby on the biggest stage of them all in the most meaningful games that Wales will play. And so I don't think anyone knows where Wales are because you could strike it lucky. It's like playing roulette. You put all your chips down. The ball might roll in such a way as it turns out all these guys are absolutely amazing international players, and the element of surprise is going to be there because most of these guys will have never played against their Six Nations opponents. Um, or it could be some of them are good, some of them need a bit more work, some of them just aren't cut out for it. There's so many different options here. I don't think it will be the one where Wales have struck lucky and it'll all line up.
That's the thing. And we will get everyone's table predictions in just a moment because it is predictions time. Paul, I can only imagine you've been waiting to tell us your bold prediction and the player you're most excited to watch, and as you all probably have, but we'll start with that one. It's always the one that everyone gets excited about, especially we did an under 20 spot the other day as well, and people are like, who are they going to talk about? Who's the one player you're excited to watch? And I'm going to set a rule for the three. Only one of you can mention Antoine Dupont because of obvious reasons. So, Paul, who is that name that stands out to you?
Interesting. I've been going through a lot of the French squad trying to work out who I was going to pick out, and I hadn't really thought about Dupont because I mean it's just kind of goes without saying these days. I think I'm going to settle on his halfback partner, Roman Ntamack, just because it's been so long. It's since August 2023, so 18 months since we've seen him in a French jersey. There's been a lot of chat about the number 10 spot. He obviously got injured again just before the autumn, so missed the whole of the autumn. Has taken a little while to get back up to speed. He did look very good for Toulouse against Leicester. Granted, everyone did because they decided they didn't fancy tackling that day. But he seems to have kind of hit form a little bit more recently. And Galtier has basically always said he's my number one, as well as Jalibert has played at club level. And I think ceiling wise, he might be as good an attacking 10 as there is in the game. But they clearly don't think it's set up for international level. So there's some pressure on Ntamack, but they're going to back him. And he is obviously an incredibly talented, incredibly classy player. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he gets on, how their attack sets up with him back in, and how it works with that 9, 10, 15 Toulouse combo with him, Dupont and Ramos.
Yeah, you have me sold there, and especially with the whole backdrop of Jalibert's relationship with France and where he stands, and obviously Ramos was like Thomas Ramos is the kind of player that you're kind of spooked by. You don't know what Thomas Ramos turns up, but the Thomas Ramos that turned up in the autumn when they needed him so much is the player that France could have, and then if they do, that'll give more freedom to Ntamack. And I know, Gav, you mentioned on the 42 pod today, like when Ntamack has that freedom, he does things you don't notice. He's such a strong defender. He's
Mm.
just gets everyone going. Even though Dupont will take the headlines, but I think that's a great shout. Gav, I'll come to you next. You could go. I remember last year distinctly. You mentioned Alexander Isakor, which was a great shout because he is so much fun to watch. But it maybe him again. But who are you excited to watch?
He probably didn't get the game time I was expecting last year, now that I think of it, but he is a brilliant player. And actually, it was funny watching Ross Vincent run that try-in against Ulster last week. I had similar thoughts. Maybe if we're having this conversation again, I'd go with another Italian back row, like a fringe test Italian back row. But to be honest, I'm gonna keep it French as well. I find it hard to distinguish between these two in terms of how much I'm excited to watch each of them. But like I was just thinking about the two wings for very different reasons. Damien Penaud was a more obvious call, probably only fractionally more obvious call, given what we've seen of Louis Biarré. But just to start with Penaud, he scored one try in last year's championship. Like he probably would have been most people's pick for top try scorer going into that championship, and I would say like flattered to deceive for various reasons. And the way he's playing at the moment, it's not even so much like so many of his tries, Kalon, as everybody in this call will have seen, like are just walk-ins where Bordeaux's backline is so potent and so well drilled that he gets sitters presented on the plate for him. And I think it's only when you see him at test level that you actually see the best of Penaud for that reason, because he's almost forced to show that broader palette of skills that he has. And his skill set is, to my mind, like up there with the great wings that I've ever seen play the game, like just his handling, his game-breaking ability. He doesn't really need a kick game even, I love watching him play. And then I suppose to some degree there's a yin and yang effect to what Biarré is in comparison to Penaud, in that he's a lot more slight. He's got breakneck speed. For a long time, I probably misinterpreted what he is as a player, as somebody who's just like a stone cold killer, excellent finisher. He's still only 21, obviously, but I think what we've seen of him for Bordeaux so far this season is he's adding a lot more to his repertoire as well. And you're starting to see him probably contribute more, a little bit even infield in Bordeaux's attack, just showing some of his own handling skills. He's got that little Jacob Stockdale chip and chase added to his arsenal now as well. And Christ, I'm terrified by both of those men and virtually everybody in that France team coming into the championship. So those are the two. I don't really want to split them, but I just think it's going to be a lot of fun watching each of them this year.
No, it's Bielbiari strikes me as a lot of people's choice as well, because it's that try he scored against it wasn't against Ulster. I think it was against Exeter. One of those teams where he just fly hacks the ball. He's got about 30 yards to make up, and it's gone. And like it's kind of like the conversation we come back to every couple of years. It's either there's no substitute for speed or there's no substitute for power. I think we're kind of in the middle ground at the moment in rugby, but it will be Bielbiari. Like we just know that's who we're going to reference when it comes back around to speed. And like as always with these things, I always forget to write down my own answers, so I always forget who I'm going to say. So I had a quick look through the Scotland squad, because I feel like there's someone there that I could look at. I was going to say Fergus Burke or Tom Jordan, but I don't think we see Finn off the field enough. So for Scotland, because I like them a lot, I'm going to go with Rory Darge. And it's not a sexy pick, but I just think Rory Darge is a glue player. Andy Christie's already ruled out, of course. We mentioned Cummings and Gray. I think if he has a good championship, Scotland's hopes go a lot further. And I'll leave the backs to yourselves. Sam, the player you're most excited to watch in this year's championship?
Yeah, so I think he's probably a fair way down the Welsh depth chart with everyone fit, but it's Danny Edwards, who at 21 is coming at fly half. I suspect he will be the starting fly half. There's Ben Thomas in there as well, but I think he's probably better suited to the centres, or some kind of role where we can get both players on the pitch. But after what I was saying about Ellis Mee and some of those players in the Welsh team who just haven't got experience, Dan Edwards, as I say, just 21, but he's already played 34 times, or 44 times actually, between the Ospreys and Wales under 20s, and he's won more times for the Ospreys than he's lost. And those are two things you can't say much of featured in many of the Welsh players' palmares. So I think he's going to be exciting. I think the more that can be taken off his shoulders, the better. But I do think he's got the opportunity to come in. And I would just give a very quick shout as well, just because I think Paul might enjoy this as well. If people didn't see, a player called Alex Masibaka got called up for Scotland today, who is a number 8. He is originally from Australia, but he is playing for Soya Angoulême in the Pro D2, who I'm actually going to go and see in a couple of weeks. But uh, he's one of 2 players for Scotland from Pro D2. There's one in the French team. Joel Abd as well, England defence coach, is coming up from Oyonnax in Pro D2. So it's a growing league. If you like your nerdy rugby, if you like a bit of the kind of the esoterica, or it's becoming less so, but they're really ones to watch.
I can't argue with that. And I actually didn't even think about the fact that there's like a whole swarm of players who could be in the championship that are actually playing Pro D2, which if you said that 5 years ago, you wouldn't have believed it. I understand bold predictions can be very tricky. So if you have one, feel free to jump in. But if you don't have one, I'll let you off. Gav, do you have one?
Yeah, you've actually mentioned him already, and this is absolutely outlandish by me, and it will be injury dependent. But I have a feeling, I think Tom Jordan could be a Lions bolter by the end of the championship because of his versatility. Now, it will depend on whether something happens to Finn, which you don't want to happen, or whether something happens to Blair Kinghorn, which you don't want to happen. I don't even need to add the caveat, obviously. But I would say equally, even if Staffy McDowell winds up deputising at 12, like Jordan is comfortable there as well. Basically, there's just a fair bit of scope for him to actually slot in. And I think if he gets a run in this Scotland team, particularly, he only has 3 caps so far. I've really liked what I've seen of him for Glasgow. He's going to absolutely tear it up for Bristol. Like, you can imagine how much fun he's going to be in that team. And I just think because he covers so many positions, if he just proves himself a test player, which is conceivable, I could see Farrell drafting him in because he's such a Swiss Army knife of a back, and he would make sense to me. I started off by saying it's outlandish. Now I've actually convinced myself of my own bold prediction. But yeah, I suppose an easier way to say this, if it wasn't a bold prediction, I would just be hoping to see a little bit more of Tom Jordan, maybe add him to the previous category of players I'm looking forward to watch, provided he gets that opportunity.
I could easily have done this category, just been outlandish Lions bolters. My one is still, I think there's going to be someone selected at 9 that none of us expect to see at the moment, because the 9 depth is hairy at the moment, to say the least. I'm just going to say Craig Casey, but anyways, he's not playing, so I can't include him on this one. Sam, have you a bold prediction or a Lions bolter? I'll open up to both.
So my bold prediction, I don't think I fully believe this, but I could see a world in which it happens. So that's my massive caveat that I'll make this bold prediction as long as I don't get held to it. But I think Super Saturday will be the last time Gatland, Townsend, and if we make it bold, let's throw in Borthwick will be coaching their national teams.
That's very bold, Sam.
Yeah, I actually thought you were going to say it was the last time we see it on free-to-air TV, and I was
Oh,
like,
God,
I'm going to
no.
cry here. I don't mind that one. Have you a Lions bolter while we're at it?
Ellis Bevan, Welsh number 9. You talking there about scrum halves being a difficult spot. I think he is looking quite impressive. He's kind of a Mike Phillipsy type. I could see him going on a tour. I don't suspect he's going to be starting, but it would be a hell of a bolter if any of the Welsh players get on the tour, to be honest. So him in there at some point.
Yeah, it's literally Jack Morgan, Dowie Lake, and then how they hold up to injury, because unfortunately they're wonderfully talented players. They just can't stay fit, and that's the sad realities. Paul, again, same to yourself. You can do bold prediction or Lions bolter or both.
I will start with a bold prediction. Talking about other players who want to see in action and someone out of position. I reckon we will see at some point in the championship Yato Malbaka lining up in the backs for France. He obviously is a hooker, but trains at number 8 quite often with France when they don't have enough players there. I think he might be the most talented ball playing hooker. And I know there's obviously a very strong candidate from Leinster, but just in terms of everything he can do, and I could see in a 6-2 bench split at some point them needing someone to go into the centres and think, actually, he'll do a trick, and he will probably thrive knowing him. So that would be my guess. And then in terms of a Lions bolter, this isn't that exciting. It's very unlikely. But I've seen a bit of Sale recently, and I think Tom Roebuck is a player who is just going to absolutely thrive with these new laws. And I don't know if he'll play for England. It doesn't sound like he's going to be in there initially. But he might be the best winger under a high ball in the Championship if he plays. And I could see in a position where there are lots of contenders, but I'm not sure anyone is nailed on as such for the Lions. I could see him maybe forcing his way into the conversation if he can get into the England starting lineup to start with.
Definitely, and especially with like to add to that, Darcy Graham, James Lowe, lads like that have a questionable history record. I mean that with great respect to them, but that's a good shout as well. I actually think there's another Sale lad who could be an outside bet, and that's Asher as well as Finn Baxter, because I think third choice Loosehead is, a bit of a question mark as well. But the big one, the full table predictions, we kind of already done this. We're just going to put it together now. Paul, I'll start with you. I'll let you just run through 1 to 6. Who's winning it? Are we going to see a slam? Are we going to see a triple crown? Take us through it.
I'm still not really sure. I'm going to go for. Are we going 6-1 or 1-6? That's the question.
We'll go one. I'll just go 1 to 6. Fuck it.
Okay. I have Ireland winning it. I'll go France second, England third, Scotland fourth, Italy fifth, Wales sixth. I think no Grand Slam, although I'm not convinced on that. And I'll say no Triple Crown, which I think is me somehow saying that France are going to win in Dublin and lose at Twickenham, but I won't go through every game.
Yeah, I actually had that thought as well when I was doing it in my head. I'm like, which one am I going for? But I have the same table as you. I just could have, or sorry, no, sorry, I have France, Ireland. I have Scotland fourth, England third, and then Italy and Wales. So just to speed things up, Sam, your full prediction and all the trimmings, Millennium Trophy if you want to throw it in there as well.
So I think France, Ireland, England, which I think probably goes against Borthwick getting the sack if he finishes third in this succession. Italy, Scotland, Wales. I think France will win the Grand Slam. I think Ireland. I'm trying to work out if I think they will win the Triple Crown. I think that I'm trying to work out whether that's you can do that and finish second. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't think Wales will win a game.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we may have a trend here when it comes to the last place team. Gavin, I'll let you finish things off. What is your table?
France to win a Grand Slam, Ireland to finish second, but I think it'll be a coin flip with England. A couple of weeks ago, I would have said England to finish second, to be completely honest, but I think enough Ireland players have played themselves into form that they would challenge for a championship at least. And also, to be honest, the Tuipiloto injury massively influences my call here, because I had a sneaking suspicion Scotland might finally do Ireland. Because it was week 2, they were going to be coming in presumably off a victory. I do think his injury changes things. So yeah, France, Ireland, England, Scotland. Fuck it, I'm going to go Wales 5th. And unfortunately for my beloved Italians, it may be one of those years where they're competitive in games but don't win them. I think Wales, I cannot see, I don't want to live in a world in which Wales go 17 games in a row losing. So I think they're going to break that duck at some point in this championship. I don't know how, I don't know against whom, very possibly Italy. And let's get them off the floor.
I think there's enough from those predictions that we can tell there's going to be intrigue, because I do not believe there'll be a Grand Slam. 2 of you said there'll be a Grand Slam. It's that kind of year. One person is Scotland down in 5th. Like, if Scotland finish 5th, there's going to be absolute ructions. Like, it's going to be so exciting to talk about. And we will have 6 weeks to talk about it, not just here on this channel, but on your various channels or columns or wherever it may be. But gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this evening. My thanks to Gavin, to Sam, and to Paul for a very enjoyable preview show. We tried to cover everything. We could have went for 12 hours. We still mightn't have covered everything, but that's just the way it is. If you do like what you see or hear, as always, and want to join us for the busiest 6 weeks of the season, subscribe on all good platforms. You can find the links for the channels below. We'll be back on Thursday night to preview Ireland's opener with England. And then on Sunday, we will recap the 3 men's senior games and the under-20 clash with England as well. But for now, and until next time, take it easy.